Overwhelming.
Motivated.
Worried.
Anticipation.
Outraged.
Worry.
Fearful.
Nervous.
Powerless.
Responsibility.
Frightening.
Hopeful.
Impuissant.
Terrified.
Hope.
Devastating.
Fearful.
Passionate.
Exasperated.
Outraged.
Chaotic.
Concerned.
Disappointed.
Eager to take action.
Hi there and welcome to the Youth Climate Summit. My name is Rachel and I'm a teacher and I'm also director of an organisation called ThoughtBox. And I'm here today to introduce with you the big picture of climate change. And I've invited two friends to help me to introduce to you this morning. So we've got Dr. Emily Grossman, who is author of Brain Fizzing Facts and a scientist, and she's going to be talking to us a little bit this morning. And we've also got Andy Cameron, who is founder of Healthy Mind UK. Now, both of them are going to be talking to you about the science and the emotions of climate change. And we're going to think a little bit more about why these are really important for us all to learn about. Now, we've all heard about climate change and biodiversity loss, but what does it mean for us in the world around us? And we may have seen some of the impacts of climate change. We may have heard about fires and floods and animals in danger, but we're going to learn a little bit more this morning and a lot more next week about climate change and biodiversity loss and some of the things that we can do to feel more empowered in the future. Now, a little bit like the coronavirus that we're all in at the minute, there are lots of things happening in climate change and biodiversity loss to people all over the world. It's actually something that's impacting all of us. But a bit like the virus, it's hard to see where it's happening. And so we're going to learn a little bit more about some of the effects of climate change and also why it's such an important issue for us to think about. The good news is that millions of people across the world are already taking action and doing a huge amount to make positive changes. And we're going to be learning a lot more about what we can do next week in the Youth Climate Summit. But let's start off by asking Emily a bit of a question about climate change. So we know that climate change and biodiversity loss are things that we need to be thinking about and talking about, but why is it such a big deal?
Well, the reason it's such a big deal is because climate change and biodiversity loss really impact so much of our everyday lives and will continue to do so even more in the future unless we do something about it, which is what this is all about. So the reason that the climate is changing is because as a result of human actions like burning fossil fuels or farming cows which fart and burp out methane, our greenhouse gas layer, our fluffy blanket around the planet is getting a little bit thicker. And that means that our atmosphere is heating up. Now, that extra heat in our atmosphere is the equivalent of 5 atomic bombs worth of energy going into our atmosphere every second. Now, that extra energy has lots of different impacts. So firstly, that extra energy causes heating of the planet, and that means some areas are getting hotter, we're getting more heat waves, and where it's hotter, it's also drier, there's less rain, that means we can get droughts, drying out of the soil, making it harder to grow crops, and also damaging people's livelihoods in some areas and making it harder to get fresh water. Now, also as a result of this extra heat, not only are some areas getting hotter and drier, but other areas are getting wetter. And that's because the extra heat can cause water to evaporate from the oceans, which ends up as water vapor in the sky, which condenses to form clouds. And those clouds then dump their water vapor as rain. So areas that are already quite damp and wet are getting even wetter, and sometimes that can lead to intense storms, which can lead to floods and hurricanes. So this is the sorts of extreme weather that we're actually seeing more and more of across the globe. Now, it's not just that this weather can damage our lives directly, damage our homes, also impact the lives of animals, but it's also that when we get more extreme weather, that impacts our ability to grow crops, and it also impacts our ability to even survive on certain parts of the planet. Plus, that extra heat, and of course, just to say, those crops are what's needed to feed us. And of course, here in the UK, we grow some of our own food, but we also rely a lot on crops that are grown in other countries. So if other countries are getting floods or droughts or storms, then that could also impact our ability to bring food here to the UK. Now, the other thing that this extra heat from human actions, from fossil fuels and burping and farting of cows, does to our environment is that it causes the water in the oceans to warm up a little bit, and that causes water to expand and take up more space, and that has an impact on sea levels. So sea levels are rising, plus the extra heat causes the melting of ice caps. You might have heard about the polar bears in the North Pole losing floating blocks of ice where they hunt for their seals. But also, as ice melts, if it melts off the land, like in Antarctica or in glaciers or in Greenland, it dumps its water into the oceans, and that also causes sea levels to rise. So those rises in sea levels are what's making some areas around the coast particularly vulnerable in parts of the world, whereas sea levels rise, it may become more likely that areas are going to get flooded where people are actually living. And then we've also got to think of the impacts of the hot heat in the oceans and ocean life and animals in the oceans, and the fact that rising temperatures and indeed our cutting down of trees actually destroys the habitats for certain animals, and the rising heat, the temperatures make it harder for those animals to survive. And those animals are also not just lovely to look at and creatures that are, you know, part of our planet and that we care about, but they also are very valuable to humans. So I already mentioned growing crops to feed us, and growing crops, you probably know, relies on insects to pollinate the crops. So if we're losing our insects, which we are doing, it's going to become harder to grow crops. Also, we're losing creatures in the soil like earthworms. Plus, we're ploughing up the soil. So through things called intensive agriculture, which is how we grow a lot of our food crops, and also livestock farming, that's farming cows and sheep and to feed us and to give us meat and dairy, that we're actually using our soils in a way that's quite damaging. And that also makes it then even harder in the future to grow crops. Plus, as we're melting the ice, then that can also impact areas of the globe that rely on, for example, glaciers to supply areas with fresh water to drink. So you see, climate change and biodiversity loss, that's loss of wildlife, have many different impacts across the globe, and we're already starting to see those impacts, certainly in poorer parts of the globe. And inevitably, unless we make changes, those impacts are going to start to be felt more and more in other parts of the world too. So we really do have to sort of change our ways in order to help look after the planet right now.
Thank you, Emily. And it's really useful for us to start learning some of the facts and figures and really understanding what's happening around us. But it can feel really quite scary when we hear all of this information coming at us, and can feel quite overwhelming. And I wonder, Andy, if you can talk to us a little bit about what we can do when we have these big feelings, when we're hearing all this information about the climate changing around us.
Yeah, I think the first thing that you need to do is to understand that climate change is happening and it's real. I think once we start to understand and appreciate that it's real, we can then start to understand our thoughts and feelings a little bit more. Now, the one thing I always say to young people, especially people in primary schools, is I say, if something's worrying you, it's making you feel sad, nervous, or something that really is playing on your mind, speak to a responsible adult about how you're feeling, whether that's a teacher, a parent, a guardian, an older sibling at home. Speak to them, and they will help you to then put things into perspective, to start to understand that things ain't always as bad as they seem.
Thanks, Andy. That's a really good advice about the importance of speaking. And I think when we're hearing about all these facts and figures about the climate changing around us and wildlife loss, we don't need to just keep it inside us. And actually, one of the big things that we can do is talk to other people, because we're all experiencing this together and we're all going through this situation together. And it's really good to start talking to each other and listening to what we all know and what we're sort of thinking about. But part of this, the importance for what we can do ourselves is to know where to go to find the facts. And Emily has been working with a group of scientists, and they've been working on a book that's called Emergency on Planet Earth. And I wonder, Emily, can you just tell us a little bit about the scientists you've been working with and why you decided to come together and write this book?
So yeah, the reason that we did this is because actually about a year and a half ago, I knew very little about what was going on the planet. Now, I'm a scientist and a science communicator, and it's actually not something I knew much about because there's just not that much information out there, at least not in a way that's easy to read and easy to understand. So when I started to discover the truth about what's going on, and that it really is pretty scary and that there's quite a lot that we really need to sort of take action on, the thing that I wanted to do is to get together with a group of other scientists and to help people to understand the truth about what's going on and to empower people to have hope and to take action and to do things to make a difference. So a group of us formed a group called Scientists for Extinction Rebellion, and we took some action by doing some protests in the streets. But actually, as you say, the kind of most biggest project that we took on was creating an easy to read guide called Emergency on Planet Earth to help people to find out the truth, but also to work out what they can do to make a difference. So that's free, it's available online, there'll be a link to it in the resources pack, and that's something that you can all to use to dip into it. There's a great contents page where you can just find out exactly which bit you want to refer to, whether it's about wildlife or whether it's about ocean life or whether it's about what the governments are doing or not doing. So you can use that as a go-to resource or as a resource in schools as well. But the other thing that I've been doing, because what I'm passionate about is communication and also about writing and helping young people to understand information, is that I'm writing currently, or I've just finished writing actually, a second book. My first book, Brain Fizzing Facts, Awesome Science Questions Answered, was out last September 2019. So the follow-up book is going to be out in the spring, so spring 2021, and that's a similar format of kind of like fun questions, multiple choice answers, lots of fun facts about wee and poo, and all sorts of silly things. But there's also quite a lot in there about understanding the climate crisis, understanding climate change, understanding what creatures on our planet we depend on and why we need to look after the creatures on our planet, and also a lot about personal action that you can take. So do look out for that. That's out in the spring. But in the meantime, I know you're going to be learning a lot of great stuff in the Climate Summit.
Thanks, Emily. And I think when you're talking there about, you know, our role as individuals and the actions we can take, I think partly next week in the Climate Summit, we're going to be learning an awful lot about some of the things that we can do individually. But Andy, I wonder if you could just talk to us a little bit more about what our responsibility is, because it can sometimes feel that the world is in a bit of a mess and we maybe have to fix it, but we're quite small as individuals and there's only so much we can do. So I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit more about what our role is.
Yeah, I think our role is to do what we can control. Now, we might see all of these things all over the TV. We might hear our parents or guardians talking about it. We might see it on the internet, or we might be just hearing it on the radio, or people speaking about it in the streets. And that can be quite scary because sometimes we don't understand everything. That's okay, because we can learn new things if we put our mind to it. And the more we learn, the more we'll start to understand climate change. And in turn, the more we'll start to understand how it makes us feel. Now, we all feel the same feelings. I feel angry, excited, sad, happy, frustrated. You all feel them feelings. Everybody on the earth feels them feelings. And that's okay. And they are normal. They are normal feelings. But remember, you can only control what you can control. And one of the big things you can do is you can speak to those around you about climate change and to see whether or not you can maybe help them make better choices, and to see whether or not they can help you make better choices. And I think that's really important, to speak to people about how you're feeling and speak to people about things that you can do that's good for our planet.
Thanks, Andy. And actually, one of the things that we're going to really start thinking about in the activities after this video is thinking, feeling and connecting. And part of our role as individuals is to learn. So we learn about the facts and figures, to also listen to ourselves and how we're feeling, and then to start turning those thoughts and feelings into actions that we can do. And they can start in the home, in the classroom, and we can work together in our schools. And we're going to be looking at lots of different ideas next week. So the Climate Summit is going to be looking at loads of different angles to do with climate change and wildlife loss, such as nature, oceans and water. On Monday, on Tuesday, we're going to look at travel pollution and waste. Wednesday, we're going to look at food, farming and forests. Then on Thursday, fashion and consumption, and then thinking about sustainable futures on the Friday. And as we said, there are so many people around the world already taking action and making very positive changes. So there's a lot that we can do, and we're going to hope that we can work together next week and just learn from each other about some of the actions that are happening and what we can do individually in our schools. So thank you so much, Emily and Andy, for being here today, and we look forward to hearing from all of you about how you get on at the Youth Climate Summit next week.